Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to another episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I call this episode the Northridge Earthquake UFO Encounter. On January 17, 1994, the city of Northridge, California was struck by a devastating 6.8 earthquake. This caused millions of dollars worth of damage, hundreds of structures were destroyed, and 57 people lost their lives. What many people don't know is there is actually a UFO connection to this earthquake. At the time, the city of Topanga Canyon, which is located only a few miles away to the south, was going through a huge wave of encounters. This was actually the tail end of a 2 years long wave of sightings, landings, abductions, virtually the entire range of the UFO phenomena. The main witness in this case is Marcellina. She lived with her boyfriend Louis in a high-end trailer park at top of Topanga, which is at the northern end of Topanga Canyon, overlooking the San Fernando Valley. And it was the day before the Northridge earthquake that Marcellina had a series of very strange experiences. On that day, she felt a strange spiritual shift. She decided that she was no longer going to let people take advantage of her, and she was going to live her life in a more positive way. That afternoon, they decided to go down to the San Fernando Valley to do some shopping and have lunch. They went to a New Age store and bought some crystals and books. And as they were driving along, looking for some place to eat, Marcellina suddenly shouted out the words, "Gasoline! Fire!" Her boyfriend, who was driving, looked around and saw no fire and looked back at her questioningly. Marcellina apologized and said, "I'm sorry, I have no idea why I said that." She just felt compelled to blurt those words out. Later, she would find out why. At the time, it made no sense to her. So they went to go have lunch, and Marcellina started having incredible precognition. She knew exactly what her boyfriend was going to order for lunch. In fact, she could predict the words he would say before he said them. It totally freaked her out, and she wondered what the heck is going on. Another weird thing happened. Right before they pulled into this restaurant, she looked up into the sky and saw what looked like fireworks exploding in the sky. And her boyfriend did not see them, but it totally impressed her. It was very obvious to her. And it disappeared, but she started keeping a much closer eye on the sky after that. So after they had lunch, it was getting pretty close to evening. They drove around for a little while longer. It was dark by this time, and they headed back into Topanga Canyon. And instead of going directly home, they decided that they would drive through the canyon for a little while and then stop off at the Spiral Staircase. This is a New Age bookstore located in the heart of Topanga Canyon. They sell books, trinkets, crystals, these types of things. And so they drove into the heart of the canyon and stopped off at the Spiral Staircase and went inside and bought some crystals and hung out there for an hour or two, just sort of shopping and hanging out. And by the time they got out, it was now somewhere around 9 or 10 p.m. And looking up in the sky, they were shocked to see some weird lights. They had just gotten into the car and were heading north up Highway 27, Topanga Canyon and Boulevard, towards their home, which is just a few miles away. And this is when Marcellina and Louis saw these lights. And I'll just let Marcellina describe what she saw. As she says, and I quote, "I started looking up in the sky and I started seeing what kind of looks like the bottom of a blimp and lights flickering. There was yellow, purple, red, and they kept flickering, like changing from yellow, red, purple, yellow, red, purple. I kept looking and I kept seeing more, and they were crossing over Topanga. And I said, 'Louis, what the hell are those things?' 'They're planes,' he said. "Those are not planes," Marcellina said. "Planes just don't fly over Topanga that way." And as she said, there were more and more, and they kept on going. They were going in sync. And Lewis all of a sudden started getting the creeps. So they're heading back up towards their home at the top of Topanga, and they continue to watch these things in the sky. They were quite low, maybe 100 feet up, just over the ridge, and it really impressed them both. Lewis was freaking out. Marcellina didn't feel any fear. She was fascinated by them and wondered if they were UFOs. What was really strange is that they were all traveling one after another. Almost looked like a train of UFOs. And much slower than a normal plane, and very vivid. The objects looked solid to her, and there were so many of them that she started to count them, and she counted more than 50. They kept hoping that another car would drive by them, but strangely the road was completely deserted. That's unusual, even at this hour, which was 9 or 10 p.m. There should have been more cars on the road, but strangely there wasn't. So that also freaked them out. Turns out that is something that does turn up in UFO cases. Roads are strangely deserted. So they were freaking out, and it was about 10 p.m. by the time they arrived at their home in the trailer park. And they were getting close to the entrance when Marcellina instructed Lewis to stop the car. He didn't want to, but she insisted. And she actually told him to back up a little bit. And then they saw something even more strange. As she says, "I look across the road over the water tower. This huge, humongous, gigantic red object lit up red with little lights. It came flying over the water tower, and it was so big. I thought they were maybe filming a movie. There are 2 water towers up there, and I would say it was about 3 or 4 times the width of those water towers. The thing was huge. It was very big, and it started heading towards us. Lewis was freaking out. I mean, he was almost like paralyzed. He wanted to get away, and I kept saying, no, don't move. I want to see what it is." It was shaped like a crystal, like a rectangular shaped thing, but it was pointed at the front. The whole thing had red lights flickering. The strangest thing was part of this object actually seemed transparent or see-through, and all these theories of what it could possibly be were going through Marcellina's head. She thought, are they filming a movie? No. She couldn't see any movie crew or people. She thought, could it be a giant kite? But it was far too big for that. She finally decided it had to be a UFO. And there was this very large blimp-like object in the center with yellow, purple, and red lights. It was so big that she thought all these other smaller objects that were following it could have fit inside of it. So perhaps it was a giant mother ship. She could hear a low humming noise coming from it. And in fact, it started coming towards them. And as she says, it went right over our heads and hovered. Lewis didn't remember the humming. I told Lewis, "Hurry up, turn around, let's go follow where it's going." And all of a sudden it disappeared. It was kind of hard to even try and follow it, because if we followed it, we would have had to go off the cliffs of Topanga. So it had disappeared. They quickly turned up onto the road that leads to their trailer park and went inside their home. Marcellina immediately called her best friend, who lived a few miles away in the San Fernando Valley, and told her to go outside and see if she could see any weird objects, because this is the direction that this giant blimp-like object and these smaller objects was heading. So her friend went outside and came back to the phone and said, sorry, she could not see a thing. The entire San Fernando Valley was socked in with a huge, thick fog. That was also really strange because Topanga Canyon was clear as a bell. So all these weird things were happening. Lewis refused to come outside after this, but Marcellina went back outside because she wanted to see more, see if there was any UFOs. And sure enough, she saw weird big white beams of light, as she describes it, shooting over Topanga horizontally. They weren't coming down, they weren't going up, they were horizontal up in the sky, like giant big searchlights. And she heard weird buzzing noises again. And sometimes they would come very close to overhead and then disappear. So she kept on watching them, and finally they disappeared. At some point, she went next door to get her neighbor Michael, and she knocked on the door and called him outside. And she's like, Michael, I just saw a UFO. And his response was, what were you smoking? And she was totally serious and tried to convince him, and he did not believe her. So he returned inside while Marcellina stayed outside, and she saw more of these weird beams of light shortly later. And she said the air itself, the atmosphere, had this weird energy to it. It was almost like crackling with energy. By this point, it was getting quite late. It was near midnight or so, and Marcellina finally went inside. Lewis was still upset. They were both wired and hyperactive with energy and stayed up late, and finally they decided that it was time to go to sleep. But for some reason, they decided not to sleep in their bedroom, and they decided they would just sleep on the living room floor. This was very unusual behavior. This is not something they've ever done before. So that was also unusual. And it was a few hours later, at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, when the Northridge earthquake struck. It was very strong and shook for many seconds, and it absolutely destroyed everything in Marcellina's and Lewis's home. They ran outside and saw that several of the trailers in their trailer park had been completely thrown off the foundation. Many of them were completely destroyed. Water lines and gas lines were ruptured, and huge flames towered up into the sky. And now Marcellina suddenly realized why she had shouted out those words, gasoline, fire, because it was playing out right before her eyes. She was having precognition. So it was a very difficult night for them as they struggled to deal with this disaster. And it was, in fact, more than a month before they got water and gas service back to their trailer park. And she lost all of her possessions. And it was following this incredible disaster and this UFO encounter on the hours before the earthquake that Marcellina felt a huge shift in her life. She no longer felt at all connected to material goods. Things did not matter to her anymore. Instead, what mattered to her was spirituality. She began feeling an impulse to do a lot of painting and started producing paintings of alien-like landscapes and outer space scenes, star fields, and things like this. So this caused a huge, huge shift in her life in several different ways. And it was shortly after the earthquake, actually the next day, she told her neighbor about her, or actually her neighbor came up to her, Michael, and apologized and said, you were right, something weird must have happened, because he had heard of another sighting. Turned out he had a friend in the valley who lived on Sherman Way, not too far away, who looked up in the sky and described seeing weird lights in the sky on the night before the earthquake. She said it looked to her like a video game was playing in the sky. So Marcellina did get independent confirmation of her sighting. And it was several months later that I also heard of a witness who lived in Simi Valley, actually a group of witnesses who also saw lights in the sky on the night before the Northridge earthquake. So numerous people saw UFOs immediately before this earthquake occurred. And there was a weird aftermath, as I said, of following this sighting and this devastating earthquake, where Marcellina became much more spiritual. And it was about 2 weeks after the earthquake that Marcellina experienced an alien visitation in her home. She was sleeping or just laying down in her living room, and looking outside, she saw the image of a figure sort of coalescing in front of her. And before she knew, it was in her living room. And as she said, it kind of looked like it was a cat face without any hair and a combination of a skeleton face. It was almost like a holographic type of thing. She tried calling her boyfriend Lewis, who was in the other room, but strangely he would not respond. And she desperately wanted to get another witness, but he just would not come out. She called his name several times, and she was going to actually get up to call him because this figure is right in front of her. And she tried to get up and call him, and she could not move. She was just there on the couch, unable to move, looking at this thing. And it starts to talk to her. And it was telling her that they were an alien species and that they were having trouble reproducing, that they had lost the ability to reproduce, and they were trying to invent new ways of producing babies, that they needed babies. And started telling her all these things telepathically. It warned her that this Northridge earthquake was just the beginning of what would be a series of earthquakes all over the world. And he talked about the paintings she had made and said that he had put those images in her mind, but that she didn't have it quite right, that it wasn't quite the way it looked there. This being, this gray type ET, said that their planet was much more crystallized, that there were lots of crystals where they came from. It also told her that she would have the ability to heal herself, that if she wanted to, she would have the ability to not only heal herself, but heal others, and that they wanted her to use this ability to heal people. And finally, after she's not sure how long, this vision just sort of disappeared. She immediately jumped off the couch and ran into her bedroom where her boyfriend Lewis was, and asked him why he didn't come, and he had no explanation. And she told him what happened, and he didn't know what to make of her story, but he could tell by her emotional response that she was absolutely telling the truth. And it wasn't long after this that she got some evidence that what the ET had told her, about healing at least, was true. Because she developed a hernia, and the doctors told her that she would have to have surgery to have this repaired. And remembering what this cat-like ET had said, she decided she was going to try to heal herself. And she put her hand over the hernia and meditated, and this hernia disappeared. And it was a few weeks later that she had another injury. She accidentally dropped a slab of marble onto her toe, her big toe, crushing it. She immediately grabbed her toe and healed it. And she thought for sure her toe would be broken. but it was just slightly sore after she healed it. So she felt like she had been given this ability by the ETs. And another weird thing happened. Following this visitation, she found out that she was pregnant. I should say that while she was having this visitation, she did feel powerful erotic feelings pulsing through her body and actually reached an orgasm while she was sitting on the couch in front of this alien figure. And so this discovery that she was pregnant really concerned her, and she did connect it to this ET visitation. And here's where it gets very strange. It was about 4 months following this visitation that she lost her baby. She had a miscarriage. The doctors were very concerned because they found no evidence of any fetus in this sac. It was completely empty. The fetus had been taken. So now she's wondering about that. She knew nothing about UFOs or the missing fetus syndrome at this time. As UFO researchers know, this is definitely a thing where people's babies, their fetuses will disappear. And this apparently happened to Marcellina. And she definitely connects it to the experience because this ET-like figure told her that they were trying to find ways to produce babies. And now she wonders if she was used for that purpose. She still feels like this was a positive experience because she had such a powerful spiritual awakening after this and kept having all kinds of precognition and intuition following this spiritual awakening. And she also remembered encounters from her childhood. As a young child, she remembered she was once in her home when she looked outside and saw an alien figure looking in through the window. At the time, she thought it was a clown. As she says, its face was like a whitish face. Its face was like a whitish face. The way my mind made it look was almost like a clown-type face. It had black eyes. I wasn't afraid, but I was always confused. I was basically convinced I really saw this thing. And she thought it was a clown. She thought it looked like a clown, but wondered if it was the orange flowers next to its head that was making it look like a clown. Marcellina, of course, did not know that many children who see ETs see them dressed up as clowns. In fact, I did a whole video on this, the ET clown connection. And Marcellina is one of several witnesses I've talked to who have seen ETs dressed as clowns. And so this was something that she remembered following this ET visitation. And she also remembered seeing UFOs throughout her life. These usually were just anomalous lights. And in fact, since she had moved in Topanga during the time of this UFO wave, she recalled seeing UFOs on a number of occasions, but always kind of dismissed it. These were always anomalous lights, which she didn't know quite what to make of. But now looking back, she realizes that they were probably UFOs. And following this whole series of weird events, this earthquake and this encounter and this visitation, her attitude towards life shifted completely. She used to be very materialistic, somewhat angry, and upset with the greed and the corruption in the world. But after that, she lost all interest in materialism, and things that were important to her were nature and spirituality. And she became obsessed with UFOs and investigating them. She eventually contacted a number of UFO researchers, including myself, and shared her story. What's interesting about her experience is it was fully conscious. She felt no fear and was completely spiritually transformed as a result. She continues to this day to have precognition, fact, it wasn't long after that she had this vision that a comet would hit the planet Jupiter. And boy, was she shocked when in July of 1994, the comet Shoemaker-Levy actually struck Jupiter. This was a huge astronomical event which caused great interest among astronomers, and she knew about it before it happened. It's one of many events that she had precognition of, and this would continue. So it appears as if the ETs sparked this ability or awakened this ability of spirituality and intuition and precognition in her. This encounter completely changed her life, and this is definitely something we see with a lot of people who have very close encounters. So yeah, it's a very strange encounter, but definitely fits the pattern I see with a lot of people. So that's why I wanted to share this account. I did write about this case in my book, UFOs over Topanga Canyon. And Marcellina's case is one of many. It's not unique. It fits the pattern I've seen in many other cases, and that's really why I wanted to do this video, because I think it shows the alien agenda. They are here because they need to find ways to reproduce, and they are here because they want to wake people up to their own spiritual abilities. And this is absolutely true with Marcellina. So that's it for today. I want to thank you once again for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, keep having fun.